Cheyenne, Wyoming is a classic western city with plenty of old-time feel. It's long been a railroad town, and the Union Pacific dominates the scene as it's a major crew change point with trains coming and going all day and night. Cheyenne honors its railroad heritage by displaying a couple of steam locomotives from times gone by. In Lyons Park, 10-wheeler number 1242 is a reminder of the old times on the Union Pacific, having been built in 1890. Across town in Holiday Park resides Big Boy number 4004, one of a group of the largest successful steam locomotives ever built. People come from all over the world to see this giant. Downtown, the depot itself is a museum showcasing Cheyenne's railroad history. But across the tracks from the depot is perhaps the most amazing part of Cheyenne's railroad history, where part of the old roundhouse and steam shop are used to keep mainline steam railroading alive, as they're the home of Union Pacific's steam program. Northern 844, which Union Pacific calls its living legend, is the only mainline steam locomotive to never be retired. She's been on UP's active roster since she was built in 1944 and is Union Pacific's roving ambassador of goodwill. Massive Challenger 3985 was the second engine to join the steam program, and for years showed people what big-time steam railroading was all about. But on the bridge overlooking the yard, a crowd has gathered to see the newest addition to the fleet, something that most people never dared to dream of. The date is May 2, 2019, and Union Pacific Big Boy number 4014 is backing out of the steam shop, about to run on the main line for the first time in 60 years. Union Pacific built the first 20 of these 4000 series locomotives in 1941, primarily to work the Wasatch grade between Ogden, Utah and Green River, Wyoming. In fact, that is the name that the UP was going to call them, the Wasatch. But in 1941, a worker at the American Locomotive Company chalked Big Boy and a V for Victory on the smoke box of number 4000, and the name stuck. The 4000s have a 4884 wheel arrangement, and they were the largest successful steam locomotives ever built, and at over 6,000 horsepower, one of the most powerful. 4014 ran between 1941 and 1959 and was officially retired in 1961 and was donated to the Rail Giants Museum in Pomona, California later that year. In 2013, Union Pacific decided it wanted to restore a Big Boy, and after evaluating all 8 remaining locomotives, they selected number 4014, and it was removed from the museum and taken to Cheyenne for overhaul, which brings us to today. Big Boy 4014 is leaving the shop and will soon take a short test train out on the main line. Not only is this her first trip back on the high iron, it's her first run as an oil burner. She's borrowing 3985's tender, as hers is still set up to burn coal. A Big Boy will take the high iron once again. Our locomotive is departing Cheyenne with a very short train consisting of the 4014 and tender, a yellow water car behind that, and 2 baggage cars for crew and tools. Behind them is diesel number 8937, which is there using its dynamic brakes to simulate a load for the steam locomotive as it's being broken in. Large steam locomotives like the UP's Challengers and Big Boys are known as articulateds. Since the rigid boiler can't bend as the locomotive negotiates curves, the front engine under it swivels or articulates as the locomotive encounters curved track. We're approaching Spear, the junction between Track 3 going west or the Denver line going south, which is where we'll be going tonight. This is the first time 4014 has pulled a train in nearly 60 years, and the crew is being very careful with it. Our train stops frequently as the shop workers inspect it and sometimes do lubrication. The train is about to join the Greeley subdivision, which runs south towards Denver. Our destination this evening is Nunn, Colorado. At the tiny town of Carr, Colorado, our train stops so the steam locomotive can be serviced, and the crowd of people gathered there are treated to the rare sight of big steam at night. Shortly beyond Carr at Nunn, it was decided to call it a day, and the diesel pulled the train back to Cheyenne, where 4014 would be prepared for her big debut. It's May 4th, 2019, and 4014 and 844 are departing Cheyenne, heading west on an epic trip. Our train is running between Cheyenne and Ogden, Utah, where the locomotives will be the stars of Union Pacific's celebration of the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. Today, the train will travel over Sherman Hill, past Laramie, and on to Rawlins. There are 3 tracks over Sherman Hill, with track 3 taking an entirely different route than the other 2. Here we see our train at Dale as track 3 rejoins tracks 1 and 2. This is considered a break-in run for 4014, so early in the trip she was still being eased along and did not work like we will see later on, although the western scenery was still just as impressive. May 5th finds us in Rawlins, with its classic Union Pacific depot and a downtown with an old-time feel. 4014 and 844 are leaving town. Today's destination will be Rock Springs. Wamsutter still has its old steam locomotive water tank, and like everywhere, crowds are gathered to await the train's arrival. Bitter Creek has the remains of an old steam locomotive service area. We've arrived in Rock Springs, where a huge crowd is gathered, and the crew is hard at work getting the locomotives ready for tomorrow. While all of the attention of this trip is being focused on 4014, 844 is a star in her own right. Built by Alco in 1944, she was the last steam locomotive delivered to Union Pacific. A 484 with 80-inch drivers, she can easily haul passenger trains at 90 miles an hour. She is the only mainline steam locomotive not to be retired, having never been stricken from Union Pacific's locomotive roster. She is one of railroading's treasures. On May 6th, the train had to depart Rock Springs at 4 in the morning because there was track work scheduled for today on this section of the line. Our early departure promised to make for a fantastic day of rail photography. Today, we will be going from Rock Springs to Evanston. Even though it's only a few miles from Rock Springs, we're still breaking in the 4014, so an inspection stop was made in Green River. Afterwards, we'll climb Peru Hill and continue west. It's just before sunrise, and our two steam locomotives make an impressive sight in the cold air just east of Granger. Our train stopped in Granger just after sunrise for servicing. This gives us a chance to see just how big the 4014 is. Together, the locomotive and tender are over 132 feet long, which translates to over 40 meters. The engine and tender weigh well over 1,000,000 pounds, or about 570 kilograms. It can top out at around 80 miles an hour and has a tractive effort of over 135,000 pounds. In regular service, they were usually confined to around 40 miles an hour, but they were also at home on fast freights moving at greater speeds. Any way you look at it, this is one monster of a locomotive. Leaving town, our locomotives put on a fantastic show for the people of tiny Granger, Wyoming. As was the case pretty much everywhere, huge crowds greeted the train as it arrived in Evanston. Tomorrow is an off day, so the crew can service and inspect the big boy since it is still being broken in. It's May 8th, and we're just east of Wasatch, Utah, as our train leaves Evanston. Even though it's May, it's snowing up here, and that will in turn turn to rain as we descend to lower elevations. Today, the 4014 and 844 will travel from Evanston, Wyoming to Ogden, Utah, going down the Wasatch Grade past Echo and Weber Canyons. Ogden is the major railroad hub for the region, and downtown at Union Station is the Ogden Depot Museum, which showcases a variety of locomotives representing Ogden's railroad past. Today, May 9th, Union Pacific is celebrating the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad with a celebration next door to Union Station. A large crowd is gathered, and 844 is in attendance as well, looking like she's waiting for something to happen. Union Pacific Chairman Lance Fritz takes the stage like a master showman.
On my left, Union Pacific number 844, the living legend, brought to Union Pacific in 1944, topping out at a speed of 110 miles an hour. Oh, come on, we can do better than that. Far down the track on my right, the latest steam locomotive to join the Union Pacific family, the big one. Union Pacific 4014, all 1.2 million pounds, 7,000 horsepower of steel and fire, waiting down the track.
UP 4014 is ready to proceed. Chairman Fritz, over. Union Pacific 4014, take them ahead. Over. Understood. Here we come. Union Pacific coming ahead. Here we come, sir.
The 4014 and the 844 recreated the scene at Promontory Summit of the Jupiter and 119 coming together to complete the Transcontinental Railroad. Chairman Fritz and other dignitaries offered comments about the significance of the event.
It's about the workforce, the laborers working 12, 14, 16-hour days in the most brutal, punishing conditions to build this railroad virtually by hand.
George Bishop and Alma Hardy came across the plains to Utah, took them 4 months, and they walked every step of the way. But my grandparents, Amos Bishop and the young Alfred Zeziger, came with his family in relative comfort on a railroad that only took 4 days.
That we can do difficult things, significant things during difficult times. We can dream big. And the sky is the limit of what we think we can accomplish as a people, particularly if we work together, set aside differences of philosophy and opinion, and work together, work hard, dream big, and success is unlimited of what we can accomplish as a community.
After the speeches, the dignitaries drove a symbolic golden spike to cap the event off. We're at Promontory Summit, Utah, 150 years to the day after the last spike was driven to join the nation together by rail, and the celebration gets underway with Union Pacific's 119 and Central Pacific's Jupiter coming together once again.
Union Pacific forever!
We're at Golden Spike National Historical Park for the sesquicentennial celebration of the joining of the Transcontinental Railroad, one of the defining moments in U.S. history. If not the same as 1869, today was festive in its own way, with a variety of people from the past, plays, and pageantry. A variety of speakers shared their thoughts about what this incredible achievement means to our country.
So many of us have seen the iconic pictures taken of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad here at Promontory Summit on this very day 150 years ago. That event, which took place on a beautiful spring morning on May 10th of 1869, much like today, was the world's first live mass media event. When Leland Stanford, one of the big four owners of the Central Pacific, tapped in the golden spike, the telegraph operator transmitted a one-word message to the awaiting world: done. And the nation celebrated. The Liberty Bell rang in Philadelphia. Hundreds of cannons thundered approval in San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and from the courthouse to City Hall and Arsenal Hall in Salt Lake City. An estimated 6,000 to 7,000 people gathered at the Tabernacle on Temple Square. Chicago celebrated the biggest parade of the century, which was 7 miles long. And the shrieks of fire whistles and firecrackers on streets and in neighborhoods commingled with the songs and prayers heard in churches throughout America.
That ingenuity, that hard work, that sacrifice. And it's the same kind of sacrifice that defined this great race to where we are today, that connected our nation. That was a story of not just the laborers, but certainly them. It also included the visionaries, President Abraham Lincoln, when he signed us into existence in July of 1862. It included the stories of the First Nations of America, and how the Transcontinental Railroad fundamentally changed their culture, their lives, had significant impact. It's about the communities that were formed along our great railroad, first starting as steam stops, as water stops, and then growing into economic engines in their own right, and now sitting at the heart of our great nation.
A far-sighted act for a commander-in-chief buffeted by the winds of war. Hope in a time of fear, optimism in a moment of pessimism, a thought of the future amid the storms of the present. The Transcontinental Railroad stands even now as an emblem of American boldness and of American union.
Bulletin D-O-N-E, done.
Most days there is far less pageantry here, but there's still a lot to see. One can see where the spikes were laid, and imagine how far from anywhere this spot must have seemed. And whether here at this historic spot or resting in their engine house, one can see the replicas of Central Pacific's Jupiter and Union Pacific's 119. Delivered in 1979, the work was painstaking to make them as close to the originals as possible. Even some hard-to-see details are faithfully replicated. Visitors can also drive the historic roadbed and envision gangs of Irish, Mormons, and the hard-working Chinese whose back-breaking work joined the country together.
Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray!
It's May 12th, and 4014 and 844 are departing Ogden with a train full of lucky passengers. The big boys were built especially for Wasatch grade between here and the summit near Evanston. And today, 4014 will conquer the summit once again in fine style. train has stopped for the night in Evanston. Here we find an old roundhouse and machine shop that is being restored by the city. They were offering rides on the turntable during our visit. As is the case every evening, locomotive servicing was underway. Most of our crew was not even born when the big boys quit operating. They are a testament to the skills being passed on from generation to generation. There was someone in Evanston, however, who did work on the big boys in the old times, in fact, even running them.
I hired out in 1947, and you hire out as a fireman and you work your way up to be an engineer. But in order to fire them, it's really a challenge. You have to try to be just a little better than anybody else as to how much coal and where to put it, and to keep the steam up. If you didn't have a good hot fire, you couldn't keep the steam up, and the engineer was on your back. If you had a good clean fire, they were easy, but if you had a dark spot in there, it would just keep getting bigger, and the more coal you put on it, it just come to a clinker. So I've seen clinkers in there, you'd swear an elephant had gone in there and died. They'd have to go to the roundhouse and break that clinker up and dump it in the clinker bin and start over.
Merrill relates his thoughts about being an engineer on the big boys.
Exciting and a challenge, and like I say, they were so big, you had to be so careful on the curves and that, but I wasn't too fond of the 4000s. They were just too big for me. Don't know that I had a favorite one other than this 844. That was, I would say, my favorite engine all the way through. Well, like I say, I hired out in 1947, and it was brand new when it come here in 45. And it was a coal burner then. After the first year, they converted it to oil. But I was on it so much, it runs number 11 and 12 between Green River and Pocatello. And I was on it and fired it or run it for dozens and dozens of times. And then even after I got to be an official the last 10 years, every time it had come over the whole district, I would have to go meet it and ride on the head end and take it to the other end.
It's 8 o'clock in the morning on May 13th, and our locomotives are leading their train out of the Evanston yard. Today, we'll be running from Evanston, past Carter, Granger, and Green River to our next stopover in Rock Springs. While yesterday featured fantastic uphill running, the first part of today has miles of downhill, so one can hear the whine of the dynamic brakes of the diesel, which saves wear and tear on the brakes of the steam locomotives and passenger cars. 4014 and 844 have way more than enough horsepower to pull the train, so the diesel mostly provided braking or created a load to help break in the 4014. The unscheduled stops have diminished as the 4014 is getting broken in, but tiny little Carter hosts the big boy as it gets inspected. Granger was our next planned stop, and as usual, there was a horde of photographers out in the middle of nowhere. Between Granger and the crossovers at Peru, the train climbs what is known as Peru Hill, and 4014 puts on a show. Our train is arriving in Rock Springs for a 2-day layover. As it pulls into the siding, one can see 4014's articulation working. It's May 16th, and our passenger train is about to leave Rock Springs after being on display for 2 days. Today we'll be running from Rock Springs past Wamsutter to Rollins. The train was supposed to spend the night on this siding. As 4014 pulled the train in, 2 of the driving wheels on the second engine went off the track. To a group of experienced railroaders, this is not a big deal, and the wheels were back on the track in no time. May 17th starts out as a cold, windy, and rainy day. Today, we'll be going from Rollins to our stop in Laramie. We've arrived in Laramie, where our train will take Saturday off. Located at Laramie is a museum in the old depot and a display of a snow fighting train featuring 280 number 535. No doubt this equipment saw a lot of use over the years. Sunday, May 19th is another cold day in Laramie. Over at the depot, 4014 and 844 are readied for the last day on the road for this trip. Today, we'll be going from Laramie over Sherman Hill on tracks 1 and 2, then on to Cheyenne. We've arrived in Cheyenne, and our doubleheader is home. It's been a great experience seeing 4014 come alive as she's been broken in. May she and 844 be Union Pacific's ambassadors for many years to come.